Hello everyone and welcome back to your channel Lawpedia. So in this particular video, we would be seeing some of the crucial aspects that have been highlighted by the Sessions Court while acquitting Tarun Tejpal of the case that was filed against him starting 2013. So before moving forward, I would particularly specify over here that whatever information I would be sharing in this particular video would be in an unbiased format as to whatever the Sessions Court judgment actually said. We would be understanding the same. So first of all, what happened? So for all those who are not aware about as to what actually happened, so the story goes like, in the year 2013, a young journalist working at Tehelka accused Tarun Tejpal, the owner and editor-in-chief of the magazine, of sexually assaulting her. So this is the particular gist of the case that we are looking at. And what further we know is a few days after the alleged incident in 2013, the complainant had written to her senior at Tehelka. So please note over here, a few days after the alleged incident. Who is the senior to whom the complainant had written? The complainant had written to journalist Shona Chaudhary detailing whatever happened. Now after this, there are also reports that Tejpal himself sent an email to the survivor after that, apologizing for his behavior and admitting the non-consensual nature of the encounter. So these are some events that happened in the year 2013 and during that particular incidents which has been reported by the complainant. And post that, approximately 2000 page charge sheet was filed and the police said there was enough evidence against Tejpal. So this was what was said during that particular time, and this was what actually happened in the year 2013. So why are we discussing it today? We are discussing it today because it's again in news as Tejpal, the co-founder and the former editor-in-chief of the Tehelka magazine, as I have already stated, was acquitted of all charges on May 21st by the Sessions Court in Goa. In an approximately 500-page judgment, the special judge Shama Joshi extensively comments on the woman's non-rape victim-like behavior and faulty investigation to grant Tejpal the benefit of doubt. So now this is the crucial factor because of which the judgment has been criticized a lot. And what happened next was the Goa bench of the Bombay High Court issued notice to Tarun Tejpal in the state's appeal challenging his acquittal in the 2013 sexual assault case. So now, apart from whether he was actually guilty or not, apart from whether understanding what are the various evidences that we need to see in a particular case, the judgment has been thoroughly criticized because it's like a manual for victim. It's like showing how the victim should respond to such sexual assault cases. So that's the primary reason. We are not stating anything as of now whether the former editor-in-chief was guilty or not. Moving forward and understanding the sections that were involved in this particular case. So these are the sections that Tarun Tejpal was charged with. Section 354, assaulting or using criminal force on woman with the intent to outrage her modesty. Section 354A, outraging the modesty. Wrongful restraint, wrongful confinement. 376, rape, and 376 2F, that is person in possession of trust or authority over women committing rape of such woman, and 376 clause 2K, that is rape of a woman by a person being in possession of control or dominance over the woman of the Indian Penal Code. So if we see, these are the wide variety of sections that have been used against the former editor Tarun Tejpal. So now we understood the background, we understood why are we making this video, why it is in news again, because of the acquittal by the Sessions Court. We have understood or noted the broad sections under which Tarun Tejpal was charged. Moving forward and drafting the judgment. So I have now specified a few areas or a few points that have been widely discussed in news so as to make you all aware that why are we debating on this. Firstly, the judge observed that there is no medical evidence, that the court found that the case lacked medical evidence. In what sense? which could not be gathered on account of delay in lodging of the FIR that was registered on 21st November, almost 13 days after the alleged incident. So now why am I saying no medical evidence? Because in a rape case or in a case in which such sections of the IPC are enforced, the medical evidence must be gathered within a specified period of time. Otherwise, there would be no medical evidence in a particular case. So there is a certain specific duration of time on which you can gather certain medical evidence so as to prove with conclusive evidence that yes, rape took place, that yes, there were sexual acts done by the accused in that particular case. However, the court observed that there was no medical evidence in this case, and the FIR was also registered 13 days after the alleged incident. Now, the court also noted certain contradictions in the case. Contradictions in terms of what person says, what might actually have happened, and whether the investigation authorities have questioned the person on the same or not. The court in this regard noted that it is crucial to know that the contradictions in this particular case are often so glaring that the exact opposite of what the prosecutrix is claiming actually happens on the screen, yet the investigation officer did not even question the prosecutrix on the same. We can see a faulty investigation aspect coming up over here in the case. And I hope you all may be aware about the fact that whenever you're proving a criminal case, you need to prove it beyond reasonable doubt. Now, quoting this particular case also noted certain WhatsApp messages that have been exchanged by the complainant post the incident and prior the incident as well. Now the messages have clearly shown her intention that existed in advance to stay back in Goa post the Think Festival. Think Festival is the thing where all the thing happened, and shows up entirely as a lie in her narrative of being traumatized and disgusted by the accused, and her abandoning her duties and choosing to stay in Goa as a result. What court basically means over here is that when the complainant is saying that traumatized, she was disgusted by the act of the accused, because of which she had to stay back in Goa. However, court notes over here is that the messages of the complainant or the prosecutrix clearly show that she had a prior intention of staying back in Goa post that particular festival as well. Instead, it shows that she had never intended to return to Bombay as per schedule and had informed no one or taken leave. So she had a prior schedule to stay back in Goa, and later her making the statement that she was traumatized and disgusted, that's the reason that she stayed back in Goa, goes completely against what actually was planned. So these are certain contradictions, as I've already stated, that were observed by the court in the narrative of the complainant. Now there is an aspect in this particular judgment of legal bias against the prosecutrix that is apparent. How? As it is suggested in the judgment itself that it is unsafe to rely on her testimony, as she is well educated, a good writer, proficient in English, and above all conversant with the rape law, and was a capable, intelligent, independent person. This reasoning is what various stakeholders are debating and contesting, that if a female is educated, is a good writer or not, whether these factors should be responsible for considering her testimony to be unsafe to rely upon. That is what court is implying by giving this particular reasoning, that just because she is good writer, proficient in English, and conversant or known with the rape laws, one should not rely on her testimony. According to the reasoning of the judgment, one can clearly derive that being well educated, a journalist, or conversant with the laws could be a ground to hold adverse inference against a rape complainant. This is the factor that have been criticized by the various factions of the public. So moving forward, we understand another very important aspect that court has observed in this sessions court judgment. Let's manipulate the evidence. The court noted that the victim had contacted the National Commission of Women, based on whose representation the FIR was registered, firstly, and a women's rights lawyer was guiding her on how she could draft the complaint, secondly, and thirdly, after the incident came to the woman, spoke to a senior advocate whose name was saved as Brahmastra in her phone, which translated to the most powerful weapon the judge observed. So now these are certain incidents according to which the court has observed that there is manipulation of evidence. Let's suppose if a rape or a sexual assault victim contacts a lawyer for help in drafting the complaint, so now court can hold it against her during the trial. That's what the implication of the judgment is. So that implication has been criticized. As the prosecutrix was in contact with senior advocate Indira Jaising, who according to the prosecution witness is a lawyer and a feminist. There was even an exchange between the prosecutrix and Jaising after the allegations against Tejpal became public. Can this be a ground that having a telephone conversation with a feminist lawyer, with a senior lawyer, can it be held against the rape complainants? Can this be the ground that the investigation or the trial goes against her? Is that the implication that we are deriving from law now? So these are certain important questions that we must raise over here. And that's why this judgment has been criticized and termed as a manual for rape victims. After understanding the various factors, the judge arrived at the conclusion that upon considering the other evidences on record, the benefit of doubt is given to the accused, as there is no corroborative evidence supporting the allegations made by the prosecutrix, and the deposition of the prosecutrix also shows improvement, material contradictions, omissions, and change of versions, which does not inspire confidence. So while we completely may agree that benefit of doubt may be given to accused if the incident or the allegations have not been proved beyond reasonable doubt, and any crime investigation cannot be based on baseless allegations and without any conclusive evidence. However, the reasoning given by the judge in this particular sessions court judgment is really questionable. We understand if there is no corroborative evidence, the benefit of doubt would clearly go to the accused in the higher courts as well. However, what the higher courts need to look over here is the reasoning given in the judgment. So with this, we come to the end of our video. I hope you did understand the various aspects of the judgment. I hope you did understand what the case is all about. And thank you so much for watching. Please do let me know how did you like the video again. Until the next video, as we always say, stay home, stay safe, and keep learning.